Redditors who have been kidnapped. What was it like and how did you escape? Serious. Story 1. I was only kidnapped for about 15 minutes. It was a coworker that was helping me get my car fixed cheap by a friend of his. We dropped the car off and went to a bar to watch some football while we waited. On the way back, we stopped at a gas station for cigarettes. I said something about him having a decent life after he told me he wasn't too happy at the moment. Wrong move, I suppose. He proceeded to beat me in the parking lot and forced me into the car. Witnesses called the police and they were quick to respond, and a high-speed chase ensued. Luckily, I was able to get my seatbelt on. We clipped another car at 130 meters. The passenger went through the front window and died when she hit a telephone pole. The driver had several broken bones. My temporary captor was crumpled up on the floor with a broken neck. He kept apologizing and told me he'd been drinking whiskey since 7 a.m. His face was a mess. Apparently, I tried to claw it off. I walked away totally unharmed physically. The car I was in looked like a crumpled-up piece of tinfoil. Found out later this guy was an ex-convict who did 30 years for takedown. He apparently has ties with the Hells Angels and several aliases. He got back out of jail last year. It's my new nightmare. Story 2. When I was 6 or 7, my parents and sister and I were staying at a hotel in Massachusetts. All the doors to the rooms opened up outside. It was summer and there was a big pool outside. We were getting ready to go swimming and I grabbed my toys and walked down by myself. I can't remember if I was allowed to walk by myself or if I just went ahead of my family. Anyways, some guy caught me alone between the hotel building and the pool area and picked me up and started taking me to the parking lot behind the hotel. Luckily, my dad was only a minute or two behind me and saw the guy. I still remember the way he bellowed so incredibly loudly and flew down the stairs and ran after the guy who dropped me and sprinted into a van in the parking lot. Weirdly, I don't think my parents called the police. At least, I don't remember any police. Story 3. It was scary. I was very, very tipsy, about 18, and I had called a taxi to come pick me up from a party and go home. I don't remember much because I was very partied too hard, but there are little bits and pieces. I remember looking out of the taxi window and realizing I wasn't near my house at all. I remember being scared, but I was tipsy and couldn't get my brain to think straight. At some point, I just blacked out. At some point, I came to and could feel a guy fingering me. It hurt. I went under again. At around 4 a.m., I woke up extremely hungover, with little to no memory of what happened. I was naked. My clothes were on the floor. I was spread out on a stained futon on the floor. I checked my body. I had some bruises. I had blood down there. I felt shaky and hurt, and I remember being very, very cold inside, like under my skin. My immediate thought was to get out. I had no idea where I was. I was afraid someone might still be there, but no one was. My money, my wallet, my cards were gone. My phone had died and was still in with my clothes. I could barely walk. I felt disgusting. I put on my clothes and half crawled out of the house, down the broken wooden steps, and cried. I had no money, no way of getting in touch with anyone, and no idea where I was. I ended up just walking in one direction until I found a school I recognized. From there, I walked home and showered in the scalding water until I was done crying. I fell asleep on the shower floor. Later that day, I went and bought Plan B and canceled my cards and cut off all my hair and quit my job. A couple months later, I attempted tragic end. I never went to the police and have since then gone to therapy, but that was the scariest time of my life. Not knowing all of what happened, not being able to piece it all together. P.S. Thanks for the gold, guys. I've never gotten gold before. I'm excited. Answer. Were you drugged or anything? I'm wondering the context, not that it really matters. That just sounds like something you would inform people to look out for. You know, that shouldn't happen after 2 beers. Sorry if I sound insensitive, I just am curious. If I ever had a friend that this happens to, and I think it has, I'll be carrying her jerk home. That's horrible. I'm sorry that happened. Story 4. Ooh, something I can answer. I was kidnapped in my home city when I was 10 years old. I was walking with my brother and our tutor on the way back from the stationery store grabbing a few supplies for school. I walked out a bit earlier than them. That's when I was snatched and thrown into the back of a car. I remember crying like crazy, and the man who was sitting beside told me to shut up or he would beat me. A few hours later, they pulled into a gas station to get gas. The driver was going to pay, and I think the other guy went to take a piss. I literally opened the door and ran across the street and hid in a convenience store. I told the guy behind the counter that they are not my parents. They just drove off, though. Police was called, and they took me to the station and asked me what they looked like. After that, my mom came and picked me up and took me home. I remember her hugging me and saying sorry a lot. Story 5. Was kidnapped for the span of about 20 minutes while hitchhiking once. I looked down and the dude had whipped it out while changing gears. I asked to be dropped off and the guy said, "Oh, so cleverly, I'm not getting off for a while yet." I almost panicked and reached for my knife when I saw a rest area 1 mile sign. I raised my voice and insisted that he let me off at the rest area. After what seemed to be an eternity, the dude agreed. I got the fudge out of there and took the bus to Scranton, Pennsylvania. Needless to say, the rest of my hitchhike across America trip had a bit of a paranoid edge to it. This was in 1995. Story 6. I was technically kidnapped for about 30 minutes when I was younger. I was playing at a park in the backyard park during a family dinner with my sister, and a younger guy with a dog came up and asked if we wanted to play softball with him. For some reason, we agreed. I was like 7 at the time, my sister 10. Might have been a bit younger. And he told me that I would need to go to the bathroom before we started, and basically forced me into the park bathroom with him and tried to get me to do some questionable and gross things. I basically freaked out and cried and eventually convinced my sister to take me back. The guy was charged with kidnapping and intimacy assault and probably other things. Lucky for me, I guess. I've had many concussions and whatnot and have no memory of really anything before 6th grade, so it never really screwed with me emotionally. And I only remember small pieces of what happened. The rest is from the police report. Edit. Just sort of want to clarify that I wasn't violation or badly hurt. I felt I shouldn't mention what he did, but I'm not affected by it, so I don't really mind. The guy basically wanted a mouthful of piss. Story 7. Twice. First time was by a crackhead. I couldn't leave until he was done smoking. Took 13 hours, was pretty shoot. Second time, I was held as collateral on a substances deal for a lot of money. I thought I was going for dinner with a buddy. We got to the restaurant and were taken to a room. My buddy took the substances to do the drop, but I wasn't allowed to leave until he got back with the money. I was pretty scared that time. Answer: you just reminded me of a time that could be considered a kidnapping. Fudge. I was hanging out after a party with 2 big biker dudes who are doing cocaine. I asked them a couple of times if I could join them, and they just looked at me like I was a ghost or something, like I wasn't even there, or with a smirk. Once I realized that the party was over and I wasn't getting anything, I was like, "Welp, I guess I'm out of here then." And both of these guys turned on me as if I had just stolen something from them, and they screamed, "Where the fudge do you think you are going?" I was pretty scared. So I just kind of stood there and I was like, oh, I guess I'm not going anywhere. Cool, want to hang out? These dudes proceeded to rail more coke than I thought anyone could snort and survive. I got none, obviously, and the whole time I thought they were going to take down me when they were done. But, as it turns out, I found out later, some people get off on having an audience when they're doing coke. And I guess that's what I was for these guys, a captive audience. After they left, I proceeded to drink myself unconscious. I haven't thought about that story in years. Thanks. For making me re-examine my past, I guess fudge. Story 8. Okay, this might be why I am a little screwed up in the head. You just hit a trigger with me with this question. I was a Boy Scout as a kid, still involved, and I believe it was scouting that saved my life. I was skateboarding from my neighborhood to another about 12 miles around the corner in a suburban area. 2 small streets separated the neighborhoods. I was heading to my friend Steve's house when this van pulled up behind me. He tooted the horn. I figured I was in his way, so I just stopped skating and moved off to the side of the road. Boy, was I wrong. The guy got out of the van and started yelling at me like I did something wrong. I don't remember what he was saying, but I knew I was in trouble. I was a kid that avoided confrontation, so I said, "I'm sorry, what did I do?" He said, "Get in here, now I am taking you home to your mother." I assumed he knew them. In my neighborhood, every parent knew every parent. I got into the van, via the front passenger door. Once I sat down, I, as always, put on my seatbelt. But after I locked it, I realized the button to unlock it was missing. Now I got scared. A little late for that. He turned the van around, like heading back towards my neighborhood, then went straight past it. I said to him, "You passed my road." He smacked me and said to shut up or he would eliminate me. What he did not know was, I'm a Boy Scout, and in my day we always had our pocket knives on us. Even in school, we just carried them everywhere. I knew that shortly down the road there was a stop sign, and I knew I was in trouble, and now I can hear my mother's voice in my head. Never get into a vehicle with a stranger. I reached into my right pocket and used my fingernails to open the knife. I acted calm. I noticed the handle to open the van door was right next to me. I saw the stop sign coming up and I knew I had to act fast. So I slowly pulled the knife from my pocket and lowered it to my right side. The older seat belts bolted to the side of the seat. So I put my hand down and slowly started cutting the belt. I managed to do it, just as he pulled up the stop sign. Luckily, in these days, it was not the retractable kind of seat belt either. So I cut the belt, opened the door, and ran like hell in the opposite direction. I knew the area really well, so I went through a yard that I knew led back to a known set of woods to me. I did manage, however, to also remember the license plate number. TRG 993. Once glance, they caught the guy with my description of the vehicle and tag number. Needless to say, for now on, unless that stranger has candy, I don't care, I ain't getting in. But thankfully, having a pocket knife because I was a scout, saved my life. Story 9. This is kinda crazy for me, but I'll bite. I was not a kid when this happened. It actually was right at the end of 2015. I had been drinking in this bar pretty much smack dab in between a college town and a suburb. I'm from an area I would consider much worse off, so I was pretty off guard. I'm also a guy, so this scenario really opened my eyes up to how women must feel about something similar happening. Basically, I had just started drinking and, stupidly, I turned around to talk to somebody without watching the drink I ordered. From what I heard, right after that drink I started acting completely out of character. Very off balance, not forming coherent sentences, slurring my words, hanging on to a friend's boyfriend just to keep myself standing. The guy set me down in the handicapped stall and told me he'd be back every 15 minutes with some water. I don't remember when or how, but I basically woke up in the woods, struggling to keep myself standing, stumbling from tree to tree, and hustling my jerk off to flee from some perceived threat. Then I came to for a little bit longer in somebody's basement, hands loosely tied and a stinging pain in my right shoulder. Much more coherent than before, I remember feeling as if the restraints had just melted off of me as I stood up and left the place. Again, I faded out. It felt as if I had ran a marathon and my body commanded me to keep going. I came to by a pretty busy road, flailing my arms in the air and trying to scream while blood filled my mouth. I was soaking wet. Must have ran through a creek. A taxi picked me up free of charge, and thankfully that taxi was in the middle of taking an ER nurse back from her late shift at the hospital. She said I had been worse than any patient she saw that whole night. I had bite marks up and down my arm, a swollen face from punches, and trauma on my left shin that a cop later said looked like it came from a billy club or something similar. I remember the intense embarrassment I felt as the cops searched to see if any police reports matched my description, assuming I had been a perpetrator and not a victim, and the swell of relief when nothing came up. I had rope burn on my wrists. My ID and debit card were in my wallet, cut into 4 pieces each in a manner much too clean to be a snap. It all feels like a dream now. I regained mobility in my left leg, still have scars from one of the bite marks. Nothing out of the ordinary, though. I'll never get closure. I'll never know why somebody did that to me, and I'll never know if somebody else got it worse than I did. I literally have no recollection of what this person, or these people, looked like, so I was useless to the police. People are fudge up. I told all of my friends and classmates at my school because I would never want this to happen to anybody else. Please watch your drinks at bars, regardless of your gender. This is not an urban legend or a scary story. I am a real person, and this really happened. Story 10. I was kidnapped about 7 or 8 times. In the height of the destabilization of my state in Mexico, families like mine were targeted because they appeared more affluent than others. In reality, we were barely better off than most, and their kids went to school regularly. One time, I got into a taxi cab to go back home, and the driver pulled out a gun on me and refused to let me out until my family agreed, through cell phone, to leave him money at a rendezvous and paid him. He wanted $50,000 but settled for $2,000 cash. Second time, I was going back home from school and a group of men jumped while I was passing through a secluded area. They took me to some empty store warehouse, fed me some tamales until my family was contacted and paid. It was about $3,000 that time. This was by far the scariest of all. The other kidnappings were more or less similar to those, except for a group kidnapping, and after enough times my family said, "Fudge this shoot," and uprooted the entire family and got the fudge out. A shame, really. We were the 5th generation in a family with a long tradition of fine craftsmanship. All that's left in that city is criminals and their families. I shoot you not, we were being kidnapped by our very own neighbors and their families, shamelessly protected and them from the law. Fudge that place. Story 11. I guess, technically, I was kidnapped. When I was 3, my parents got divorced. I was still a ward of the court, awaiting a custody judgment decision, when my father packed up his car with me and drove from Ohio to Washington State. My mother didn't press charges or whatever she would have had to do to make an issue of it. Years later, my father got ill and I lived with my grandmother for a few years, and then at 10, I moved to South Carolina to live with my mother and her husband. Meeting your mother at 10 is pretty weird, in reflection. I didn't really have any memories of her. None of the the people mentioned here individually did anything wrong, except technically, but the whole situation fudged me up deep down in a pretty big way. Story 12. I was more detained against my will, but I was 5 months pregnant and I was over at my boyfriend's house, now ex. He had gotten really tipsy while I was there, and I got really upset about how tipsy he was. This was a common scenario with us. Next thing, it turns into a full-on fight, and I tell him I wanted to go home and that I was going to catch the bus home. Mind you, it's 2 in the morning and the middle of winter. I walk to the bus stop, and here he comes raging and grabs me by the arm and drags me 2 blocks by the arm and by the hair. I'm freaking out the whole way. He takes me upstairs into his house, and I am in hysterics. I'm scared he might hurt the baby. Next thing I know, he had a knife pointed at me, and he tells me, "I'd rather eliminate myself than either one of you." Great. It's gonna be a takedown, tragic end. I somehow take the knife and throw it behind the couch and run to the bathroom, call a taxi, and tell him to come to the door and ask for me and that of I don't come out to call the cops. Then he came and I left. Story 13. Made a throwaway because main account has personal info in it that people can figure out who I am. It's scary, funny, weird how the mind suppresses trauma, especially when it happens young. You would think it will remember such influential experiences and memories. Well, I was between 5'8". I was visiting my grandparents in Dominican Republic, and older generations had a very loose way of raising kids. They taught me how to cross the main street in front of my house because they didn't want to help me cross every time. Now having kids, I can't imagine letting my 5-year-old wander the neighborhood. Unsupervised. Well, as a young boy, I was always influenced by my adults to be as suave and womanizer as the next guy. Pride was shown in having girlfriends, especially since my older sibling was very introverted or not interested in that subject. So here I am, American young kid in DR. So obviously I get the young girls from the neighborhood interested, and their parents were practically setting up play dates with both me and my brother. Well, I fall for the maid of my neighbor. Why? IDK, she was 16, 19, not sure, and had a healthy serving of bust. Oedipus complex, maybe not sure. Well, I was relenting. Flowers every day, chocolates, helping her with her duties, cleaning her room. If I saw her talking to the guys from the corner store, I would storm towards her and tell her someone needed her. Anyways, she was never really nice to me. Obviously, I pestered her. She smoked cigars, BTW, not sure if that matters. Well, one day, my grandparents left and left her in charge. My brother was put down for a mid-afternoon siesta, and she takes me to her house, gives me some tea, and I fall asleep in her room. I find it weird when I wake up and it's midnight. I try to leave, house is right next door, but everything is locked. Well, she sees me and tells me to come back to bed. I agree because. And that's when things get weird. She gets naked. I remember it like it was yesterday. Almost the only thing I remember, her body curves and weird body hair. She lights up a cigar and lets me smoke it. I feel like an adult. She proceeds to molest me. In that moment I didn't mind, but now I see the malice in it. Brief fellatio, and she sits on my face, rubbing and all. I experience things that at that moment I felt were pride-inducing, like I was ahead of the curve. Next day, midday, she tells me to be quiet or she will tell my parents what I did, and I head home and my grandma was a bit worried and asked where I've been. I tell her I fell asleep in the neighbor's house. I was tired. This even lead the years to come. I was hyper-intimacy with everyone and everything. Girl, boys, friends, family didn't matter. Parents don't know yet, and it has destroyed more relationships than I can count. My wife is the only woman I have ever told about this. And honestly, she has the same features as the cigar-smoking neighbor. Sad, I know. It's fudge up a lot in my life, especially trust in strangers. I just don't. Only 3 people can take care of my kids. My mom, sporadically mind you, wife and her mother. I fear people peeping at them through windows, or when they are in the pool, I kinda baby them, although they are younger than 6. I make sure they are always in sight. I fear I will be a helicopter parent, although I am trying. TLDR, cigar-smoking neighbor in the 80s might have drugged me and took me into her room, molested me and kept me in the house for about 36 hours. Answer. Well, one day my grandparents left and left her in charge, molested me and kept me in the house for about 36 hours. My grandma was a bit worried and asked where I've been. I tell her I fell asleep in the neighbor's house. I was tired. I'm struggling with the fact that you were missing overnight, 24 to 36 hours, and Grandma was only a bit worried. No one called the police? Even though Grandma intentionally left you in the maid's care and you didn't come home for a day, oh,